Hi, I'm Jayna Riley, and this is Ageless. I'm 40 and my life is just getting started. I'm here to share real talk and real experiences about how to live life ageless. Nothing's off the table. You know the vibes. Let's go. Welcome back to Ageless. I'm Jayna Riley, and today I am joined by Theresa Bruno. As founder and designer for Jordan Alexander Jewelry, Theresa Bruno designed pieces for Oprah, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Hudson, Pink, and Michelle Obama, who named her a favorite designer. She is now the host of the Soul Talks podcast. Theresa's life reads like a fairy tale in many ways, and like life, though, fairy tales are often darkened with tragedy, and Theresa's life is no exception. She has suffered more than her share of pain. However, she is still writing her story, and in this chapter, she is vanquishing the fear and shame that gutted her, and she shares about it on her podcast. Born of Tragedy, the Soul Talks podcast is a testament to the abiding power of gratitude, acceptance, self-compassion, honesty, connection, and love and overcoming adversity. Filmed in the Spots Film Studio in Atlanta, Georgia, Soul Talks airs weekly every Wednesday on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Theresa, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was so moved by your story, honestly, and really excited to have this conversation with you. What really jumped out to me, though, was what you shared about survival and that we're all on a survival journey, that everyone carries deep wounds, that we're all surviving something. So I'd love to just dive into that and, hear your story of survival.
Yeah, and good morning, and thank you so much. I'm honored to be on your show, and really looked at all the work that you're doing in the world as I think a very young woman taking on a really big topic, and that of living ageless and living by our spirits as opposed to by a number. I just want to thank you so much for the good work you're putting out there. We need you. We really need you. And it's very affirming, when you talk about survivorship. I will say, um, I have learned in my journey, and I'll just go ahead and get all the stuff out there really fast, and then we can unpack it as you want to. Um, I had a really fabulous jewelry business that it was the fairy tale. It was otherworldly. It came out of the gate just crazy, by Michelle Obama wearing it, the press getting a hold of it. And in the first year, it was on almost every major fashion mag in the U.S., and then it went to Europe. And I had such an extraordinary run for about 15 years. And then it all collapsed and I had to shutter the business because my most trusted employee was committing fraud, really deep, egregious fraud, right underneath my nose for about 2 years. And he was magnificent at it. And so even my accountants hadn't found it until the choice was, and I'm very, very much about paying your debts and living in business and life as debt free as possible. Those things are really core to my values. And there was no way to pay off all the fraudulent credit cards and all the debt that had been created. And still, my lines were 18 karat fine lines. So they cost a lot of money to produce. And so I could either pay off all the debt and shutter the business, or basically try to bankrupt the business and reinvent it, and that just isn't how I'm wired. So I had this huge loss, and I am a creative by nature. I grew up as a pianist. My heart is always about, whether I even try to or not, I'm just always creating something. And so that business for me was so much more than a business. It was so much of a passion. I loved working with the stones and the gold, and I felt like they told me stories on how to, how they wanted to be set. And so it was just a really heartfelt business. So when I had to shutter the business after about a year and a half of trying to keep it going and just realizing I just wasn't funded well enough to do that, um, I took on a whole lot of shame. I was so ashamed as a woman in business that I hadn't made it work because, we as women feel a different pressure as entrepreneurs, I believe, than men do. We don't give ourselves any kind of possibility, for not failure, but that something can close and it doesn't mean it's a failure. But we take it on so personally and we take it on as a gender. So I came out of that with so much shame. I was ashamed of the story I had to tell, all the people who believed in me, all the stores who represented me, my incredible clients, my investors. So I was really carrying a bunch of guilt and shame. And then I shuttered the business. I guess it was in February of 2020, and in March of 2020, COVID started. And a month later, my beloved husband took his life. So that's the tragic part where those two big events, one not even remotely as huge as the other, but I sat squarely in a place in my life where I didn't know what the ground was. And I didn't know, I had never really gone through anything like that. I'd never felt like I could really, that life would collapse around me. Um, and so I really did begin a survivor's journey. And I mean, I began it at ground zero or maybe underneath that. It's super hard. One of the things I would love to say to your audience is I'm 5 years now into this. And in that 5 years, I've been so humbled and honored because exactly what you said, I've learned that we are all surviving something. I sat in my grief and my sorrow and wondered how in the world I could ever recreate my life. And then somehow this empathy opens up for everybody else who's in sorrow and suffering. And I began to understand, okay, I might think my tragedy is worse than anybody else's, but the next person sitting beside me on the bus is feeling exactly the same way about theirs. So I began to just really have this a kind of, I guess, desire to walk alongside others who were suffering, to champion them. And another thing I learned is that you don't have to have the answers. People would come to me and tell me their stories, but they didn't need me to fix it or have an answer. They needed me to sit with them and not flinch. Look the bad stuff hard in the face, acknowledge that it's really mucky in here. It's messy, it's raw, it hurts like hell. But just to sit in it with him, and that has been one of the greatest just shapers of my life because I'm so humbled by others' suffering and the human spirit to survive. We all have it when we're tested.
I totally know what you mean when it comes to, sharing, just holding space for somebody
Right.
else. Um, I've spoken about this freely on my podcast because I'm transparent also, but I'm in a 12-step program.
Good for you.
And the whole point of the program is to heal yourself and then share it with others. And we share our experience, we share our strength, and we share our hope.
Yes.
And sometimes that means sharing the good, bad, and the ugly in the experience, but sharing what worked for me and, giving everything that people have so freely given to me, giving that away. And that's part of the reason why I started this podcast also, is because it is a place where, one, I can be creative because just like you,
Yes.
I have to have an outlet.
Yes.
Like it doesn't matter what I'm doing. Like I'm an interior designer today and I love it. It's like such a career, it's a life changer in my career. I've done many different things, but there's always some sort of creative outlet included in it. And this podcast is one of those things, but it's not for me. I do get to do what I love, but it's not for me. It's for the universe and it's fueled with love. And I feel like you might have mentioned something about it on your website that's the same for you, that your web or your podcast is about
Yeah.
service, and in service to others. And so there's a beautiful synergy that happens when we're in that world of service, when we're just holding space for another person. So
Gosh.
I want to thank you for all that you do in that.
Well, and I'll turn that right back around on you and say, how brave of you, how brave that you're out there going, I'm in a 12-step program, and you know what? I'm going to share it all with you. And I want you to walk alongside, and maybe you'll follow me. Because, I mean, just, opening that up for others to grab a hold and say, look how beautiful she is. Look how put together she is. look at all she's accomplished and she's doing this. I can do it too. I just applaud that transparency
Mm.
so much. Um, you know, the in service thing, yeah, 100%. And I think that is also that's where survival sort of comes full circle. And I'm not all the way there. I like to use the analogy my sister taught it to me. I would sit and I would cry and she would listen and she would pray and I would cry. It just kind of went on for, it felt like forever. But after a few years, she said, Teresa, I think it's kind of like, climbing a big mountain. She always wanted to do the Mount Kilimanjaro climb. Um, and she said, it's like, you've made it to base camp. You can see the peak now, you can see it, but you're about halfway there.
Hmm.
But where what you said and where I've come to in my mid-level of survivorship, I'm at base camp, I think. Um, I think when you can turn it around, when you can turn your pain, your need, your struggles, all the stuff that you need help with, you can turn it around and somehow make it to be in service. There's such incredible healing on both sides of the fence in that.
Hmm.
I like to tell the story of I had a dad. My parents were divorced, when I was very, very young. So I mostly just spent weekend time with him. But he was not a wealthy man, but he was very, very driven to serve those who had less than he did, those who were unhoused, those who had food needs. Um, and that was just kind of his mission in life. And for every little bit of money he would make in his contracting business and his building business, the first thing he was going to do was go to a shelter. He was going to feed people. He was going to clothe people. He was going to invite people into his home. His life really was such a teaching tool for my sister and me, in terms of what service means lived out, not lived big, but lived because of just exactly who you are on the inside. And so I like to tell my audience all the time, whatever your gifts are, whatever your talents are, whatever, if you can sing, if you can interior design, whatever it is, turn the spirit of it into service. And it becomes the universe, it becomes the divine journey that you were intended to be on, I believe. But that is sort of where it comes full circle.
Hmm. And I think the people that you communicate with on the podcasts as well, like I feel like the value in my podcast are the guests that I bring on,
Right.
like you. Like you
Well,
have so much to offer the world. And like we had said early on, we all are surviving something. There's like deep wounds
yeah.
there. And it's a choice. It's a choice. Do you want to stay in the victim consciousness or do you want to move out from it? And I know for me, like I've been through I've been through hell
Yeah.
and I've walked through
Yeah.
it and I couldn't have done it had I not like had that choice of, I don't want to sit in this anymore. I sat in it. I need to move forward and I'm going to follow the ones that have come before me that have the tools that I need to get through it. And I feel like you're bringing that toolbox every time you go on the mic and get up on the mic and you bring that toolbox and you pull out the tools and you're helping people. And that's what I love about your podcast.
Well, and let me say back to you, I don't know if you take time to do this. Here's me turning the teaching thing on. I'm older than you, so I get to teach a little bit. No, I'm listening to you and I'm going, Jayna, do you take time to honor the journey you've been on and where you've come? Because what you've done in your life is transformative. It's transformative to you. And then what you're doing and sharing it, it's like you just that light just, I mean, you're just shooting it out all over the place. I feel like what you are doing with your life and where you've turned it with your podcast and in service is absolutely nothing short of being miraculous. You're creating
Thank
miracles
you.
with that journey. So I hope you take the time to sit still walking into 2025 and just honor what you've done.
Thank you for saying that. I don't sit still very often.
Mhm.
And I do in the mornings. Like I have a morning routine
Yeah.
where there's certain books that I read. I sit in a little bit of quiet with my little chihuahua and my boyfriend when he's awake, and we just sit there and we have our quiet time and we fill ourselves up with goodness. And I feel like, it doesn't just have to be in the morning. Like I can stop at any part of the day, do a short breath work, do a short
That's
meditation.
right.
I just signed up for a new app this morning. So
Oh, which
now
one did you sign
because
up
I'm
for?
saying it on the what?
Which one did you sign up for?
Open.
Oh,
It's called
I don't
Open.
know that.
And I had never heard of it before and it looked interesting. And so I'm committing to this 21-day
Oh, I
course.
love it. I love it.
So now that I've said it on the air, I have to do
You do
it.
have to do it. You made a commitment to the universe to do it.
But yeah, you're right. Like I don't take a lot of time to sit and reflect and see how far I've come. This whole year for me has actually been quite a life change. I left California for the first time since I was born and moved to Colorado
Oh,
and was on a hiatus with my podcast. You're actually my first guest
oh,
since I've been
thank
back.
you. I feel honored
So
to be
I'm
back.
so glad that you are.
New beginnings, all new beginnings.
Yes, all new beginnings. And I'm living in a ski town,
Oh,
Winter Park. I've
oh my
never lived in the
gosh.
snow before.
I'm
I've
so
never lived in
jealous.
the
I'm
mountains.
jealous,
Oh,
deeply jealous.
it's snowing right now. And I've never lived in this before, but
So magical.
I've adapted to it. And it's just been, I am happier
That's
than I've ever been. I get to do what I love. And now I was so excited to do this podcast today because it's been a minute.
yeah,
A lot has changed,
yeah.
but it's just that I'm going to sit for at least 5 to 10 minutes today thinking of
Honor
you and
yourself.
thinking about
Yes, honor this
the journey.
because those are big changes you've made this year. I do feel though, as you're talking, I can just feel, the earth and spirit pulling you to a place that grounds your body into the earth more. And this place
Mm,
is so beautiful and magical, for you. And you're meant to be maybe more connected to the earth.
you're probably right.
Yeah, I mean, it's what it feels like as you're talking. I'm thinking, this is aligning. This is aligning for her. Oh,
And my little pocket dog, city dog, is living the best life up
oh,
here. I mean, during the summer when it wasn't snowy, I mean, and even in the snow she'll go, but she's a tiny wolf. Like
oh,
she loves a path, she loves the outdoors, she can hike all day.
oh.
And,
I said, I'm listening to you about this precious dog with all this fierceness. And, I'll say to your listeners, 2 days ago, I had to put to sleep this little 14-year-old Maltese. And this is, I think it's not, I'm not saying that just to get everybody else's,
no,
but
Teresa, that's the worst.
I've only had to do it once before in my life because, you have dogs for such a long time.
Yes.
That little dog, his name was Jules, was with me through every bit of the roughest of everything.
Mhm.
And he had, sometimes he just gave me strength because 7 pounds of absolute fierceness and
Mhm.
determination and joy. He was just a joy bundle, and so protective of me. And so I saw it coming. It's been coming for about 6 months. And I had asked him, I would get in his face and say, please stay with me through Christmas. Just please stay. And then the
Mm.
day after Christmas, all the signs happened to show me that it was time. But one thing I want to say, because we're in this holiday season, and everybody, everything's so heightened in terms of being triggered about sadness, the people we've lost, the relationships we've lost, the jobs we've lost, anything that has created a lot of sadness, sorrow, and suffering in our lives, I think is magnified at the holidays, and it
Mhm.
triggers all that stuff. So I would ask everybody to be gentle with themselves, and do exactly like what you talked about. Take your time, morning, noon, and night if you can, to let spirit speak to you. Take time to breathe, really deeply breathe in absolute grace, and then just let it go. Invite whatever, however you believe in divinity, whatever your belief is, absolutely invite that into you to help you get through this. Because, having to put that precious dog to sleep, I got to tell you, the last 2 days, I've done nothing but work on myself because it
Mm.
triggered everything that came before.
Yep.
And then the holidays, also, I think, magnify loss. So I just want to say to your listeners, take some time for yourself, listen to your spirit. And another thing I like to tell everyone, and this is something that I, like you, I've worked so hard my whole life running multiple businesses, creating businesses, being an entrepreneur, and just running, running, running. And it took tragedy for me to really learn that spirit whispers.
Mm.
Spirit doesn't jump up and down and scream at us.
Mm-mm.
We can put out there what our needs are. We can ask spirit to work for us. But I've learned that spirit for me really whispers in stillness. And so I would encourage, all of us, me included, to sit still, ask for what we need, ask for help, ask for supernatural intervention, ask for miracles, but to get still and put it out there, to take care of ourselves.
I love the way you put that, where spirit communicates in silence or stillness. Is that what you said?
Either one,
Okay. I love
either
that.
one.
And I feel like it's the same thing with lessons
Mm,
that they're going to show up in your life
mm,
over and louder until we deal with
mhm.
it and get it
Yes.
right. And I feel like, God's always there, that whisperer, higher power,
Whatever
whatever you
you
want to
call it.
call him, whatever you want to call it. I feel like, yeah, you almost in that pause, we find that voice, that
That's a key word. So much power in the pause. There's
so much
so
power
much
in the
power in the
pause.
pause. Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple other, my mind's racing with all the things that
I
you did
know
so
we
good.
put a lot on the
I know.
table.
Well, like you said about, it, golly, do we have to learn lessons every single day and all the time? And it does feel like it, but I was really struggling with a relationship that isn't quite, on, aligning. And, it's hard to walk away from the things that, or and the people who no longer serve you, or maybe you no longer serve them. And
Mhm.
so I was really kind of fraught about it yesterday and thinking about how, what's my step forward here. And the word freedom was in my mind last night. And before I went to bed, I was thinking, I want to talk to my audience about freedom, and what does freedom feel like? What are the choices we make that give us freedom? What are the choices we make that bind us? And I'll be darned, I got up this morning to do just like you do, sitting in my bed, my cup of coffee, and I'm reading prayers from Tracy Clark, 31 Days of Prayers and Affirmations. And the first thing I turned to was about freedom. It was a prayer to let go of the things that don't serve us and to live and walk in the freedom that is our truth and aligns us to spirit. It's exactly what you said. When you need to learn something, it
Whoa.
keeps dropping in. I was like, okay, all right, I got it.
Oh, right, I got
Yes,
it.
I'll do it. I'll do it. I don't want to do it, but I'll do it.
Well, I just think you are such a strong woman. I mean, you're proving it just by being here on the podcast today after having to put down your precious baby. I did it 3 years ago with a 14-and-a-half-year-old Chihuahua, and she walked with me through everything. So when you were sharing about
Oh,
that your baby had been with you through the roughest points, like I remember what that felt like, and having to say goodbye to her, even though I knew it was coming, was one of the hardest things. It might have been the hardest thing I've ever been through, and I couldn't
really?
imagine ever doing it again. And then I got another
I
one.
know. Yeah, and I think I have a feeling you had some similar situations, but it's like in 5 years, it's probably the last thing I know of that was so attached, besides of course my children, but so attached to my late husband. And my late
Mm.
husband he and this dog had just such an incredible relationship. And it was like when I was holding him and I was having to say goodbye to him, I felt like I was letting go again of parts of me. And I haven't even worked through this and processed all this. It's just 2 days in, but I guess it's why I feel such empathy for the folks who are listening to us, because they listen, because they identify with our pain and why
Mhm.
they listen to us. And I know that others are going through exactly what I just went through and you have been through before. And it's hard as hell to lose a loved, beloved pet. They're
Mhm.
part of us.
They are part of
Yeah.
us. They're part of the family.
Yeah.
I call mine a tiny human.
Me,
Like shit.
100%. Their eyes are so human. Well,
They really are. And they're as unconditional as it gets.
isn't it the truth?
You know, they are the definition of unconditional love.
Yeah, they're no, I mean, even if you
And
have to discipline them, they just still love you.
yeah,
Just,
you could do no wrong.
um,
So I want to
yeah,
sidestep real
sure.
quick into your self-expression and your creative outlet and how you use that as a tool for healing.
I've lived my whole life since I was a little girl. It's just that's a God-given thing, and we all have gifts and mine run creatively. I'm always like there's something to be designed, there's something to be created, there are colors there, it's
There's
just
color.
music in my head, whatever it is. And I owned a marketing firm until 2 years ago, thankfully a very successful one. And I started it at 29 and got very trained in commercial filmmaking. And you were creative director of a firm. I was creative director of my firm and president creative director. And, just I've spent the last 5 years since losing my business and losing my just incredible best friend, wonderful, best human being, husband, um, trying to figure out life constantly is pulling you, I believe, if you're listening to what you're supposed to do next. And so I be, I began in the survival journey to realize that what I was doing in work, my marketing business, was not aligning with my survival journey. It wasn't aligning with my spirit pull, my heart pull, um, because I began to have so much I felt like might be helpful, that someone would identify with. Because listen, in this culture, our culture, and I think the Eastern culture just does a heck of a lot better job than we do. Um, we don't have a language for death and dying.
Mm-mm.
We don't give space for grieving. We're supposed to be back at work in, I don't know, max 2 weeks and be on and performing and functional. And I got to tell you, grief didn't work that way.
Mm-mm.
It is a long, long haul. And yes, you have to go on living. You have to learn to walk alongside the grief. What I like to say is you eat with it, you sleep with it, you take a bath with it. I mean, grief is always in this hand.
Mm-hmm.
It lightens, but I'm still carrying it in this hand. And then the other hand is how am I gonna how am I gonna walk alongside it and survive? How am I gonna walk alongside it and find another life? All that to say, my life started pulling me toward aligning with what surviving meant, being transparent about suicide, being a suicide survivor,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the kinds of things that creates within yourself, within your children, the betrayal you feel about everything you built your life on, about love, and so I started, and I was gun shy. I was really gun shy about getting back out in social media, because I got really flayed in social media with the whole jewelry shuttering.
Mm.
And it hurts, social
Yeah.
media. I like to turn it off, but there's still words that stick, and it hurts. So, and then getting out there with something as personal as surviving my husband's suicide in my survival journey, I was really just pretty afraid to do it, and yet I felt like I almost didn't have a choice. So I went to what I knew. I went to well, I know how to produce film, and one of my strengths as a filmmaker was always interviewing. If I could interview a client for a brand, if I could interview, a user of the brand, I usually got some pretty cool results. So I thought, okay, I've done this before. I know
Yeah.
how to walk through this softly and easily. And my amazing friend, Peter Siagas, who owns Spots Films, had walked with me through my tragedies and had my back. So I knew if I completely fell apart on camera, he'd kind of figure out how to help me out of it. So I just was pulled into it, not really knowing where it was going to take me. I launched it last February on February 14th in honor of James.
Mm,
Um,
I love
yep,
that.
yep. And it's been an incredible journey this year. Gotten to meet so many cool people, and heard just heartbreaking and phenomenal survival stories. You have to go through what was the impetus that created the need for the survival, and those things rip you in half.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to hear, oh my gosh, just the courage of the human spirit. So I started with the podcast, not really thinking I was going beyond that. And then I got, an opportunity with a small publisher to do a book that hopefully will be coming out in late spring.
Oh, we'll have to
Um,
have you back for that.
I would love that. It is this, it's called He's Not Coming Back. It's titled He's Not Coming Back, a journey of through tragedy and sorrow to courage and gratitude.
I love it.
So it's the whole thing. Then I got asked to be on a documentary with a lot of people who were super famous and I'm not. And I had to really kind of talk to myself about why am I with all these people who have all these healing platforms and they're really good and I just started this. And I felt spirit drop in and say, you've got a survivor story. It's
Mm-hmm.
important to be honest. So it's really leading me. It's kind of in front of me rather than me being in front of it. And I know that's counterintuitive to all the discussions we have in our culture today about manifesting. But I am letting it lead somewhat. And so that's what I'm just still here, every week's, trying to share something that I've learned about survival, sharing other stories, because I feel like we take so much strength when we can hear the courage of others.
Yes.
And that's how I landed.
I think that's the buzzword today is courage. And that is the second part of my question is how did you initiate that courage? How did you get that courage to be able to start the podcast in the first place? Like what was the defining factor that you're like, I'm all in?
I don't know if it was a one thing, but remember, so I was, I'm 5 years in now. I was 4 years in when I started the podcast. I was 3.5 years in when I started writing and going, these are things I think are important. These are things I would love to be able to share. And different people would come to me and say, hey, do you want to do seminars? And I'd be like, it's just not me. I'm really not wired to do that. And I kept sort of just writing and waiting. Courage is a really interesting journey as part of our survivorship. Um, in the beginning, I wouldn't say I had any courage right after he died, in a way. I do believe that we are all, as human beings, given a deep sense of will. And we don't have to invoke it that often, but when you go through a deep tragedy, you begin to understand the beautiful determination of will that we are given as humans. I had two boys in their early 20s when James died. And
Mm,
the minute I found my husband, whatever the strength that the divine gave me in those moments, the first thing I thought was, whatever I do, whomever I call first, the words I use to tell them, whatever I do from this minute forward in the next days, weeks, year, will be remembered by my children forever. And it's what they
mm,
will do. So my courage initially, and I was writing about this yesterday in my book. I'm four chapters shy of being done, and I'm 4 chapters late. I promised the editor I was going to have it done at the end of the year. So, but I was
you still
writing
have a couple days.
just a couple days to write 4 chapters.
Just a couple.
um, but courage started for me in my survival journey as doing it for my kids.
Mm,
I'm at least gonna show up every day for them somehow. It takes a long time to get out of bed after tragedy. It takes a long time to make your own
mm,
coffee. It takes a long time just to do the little tiny surviving things. But I would do them for them, even if I would run back to my bedroom and cry for the rest of the day. Would show up somehow for them. So that's where courage initially came into my journey. And then I think it's what I started this conversation with you. It's walking alongside others in grief and sorrow,
mhm.
seeing the suffering of others, and their will, it's like their courage to keep going is infectious. So the days I didn't have courage, if I could listen to somebody else who was going through anything, um, then I built a little bit of courage. And courage is a muscle. You don't have to
Yes.
have it all at once. You get a little tiny bit, and then you build a little tiny bit, and you build a little bit more. And before long, you go, "Yeah, I'm standing up today."
Yeah.
I can go to the grocery store for the first time in a year because that was one of my things. I would get to the grocery store and I would have an absolute fear attack. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
It's
courage.
overwhelming at the grocery store.
Well,
There's a
people,
lot of decisions to be made, and there's a lot of people to see and a lot of energy to take on.
all that, and I just couldn't face it. But courage does build over time. In terms of the courage to do the podcast, I don't know what the one defining thing was. I just kept writing and was working with several different spiritual teachers, none of whom knew each other,
Mhm.
because my survival journey has really put me into a place of a deep spiritual growth path. And each of them would individually say, "Teresa, you've got another run in you. You have something to say. People need to hear what you have to say." I wasn't really sure what I had to say yet, but I was hearing this from several different places, and that was very motivating, very encouraging. So, I definitely want to give credit there, but it just kind of then happened. It just was like, okay, I think I had somebody say to me, you can think about this forever, or you can just go do it. And so I just booked the studio. I wrote and wrote and wrote about initially the things I wanted to go in it with. I had a friend who was willing to kind of start it with me, and she had been through a tough journey with a divorce. So we were both telling our stories, and she was with me for just a short time, but it kind of got the platform out there, and we were off and running.
The rest is history.
Yeah,
So you're about to start season 2,
I am.
right?
Yes.
Which is awesome. Congrats. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
spill the beans at all about any upcoming guests, or
Oh
do we
gosh,
need to wait and see?
no! Well, I have so many wonderful guests. I just recorded an incredible interview with Elizabeth Hamilton Guinaro, I think is how you say her last name. She's published a nice handful of self help books that are some bestsellers and has this incredible podcast with millions of views. I want to be her one day, kind of thing. So I've got
Me too.
Elizabeth. Yeah, I've got Elizabeth coming up. I have a wonderful guy. Listen to his podcast. He's pretty profound and he reaches into all kinds of interesting areas in spiritual path. His name is Trey Downs. And what I
Oh.
love about Trey, and this is, I'm trying to stretch in my interview process. Trey's this really handsome late 30s guy, and he is so driven to help men find themselves spiritually and to teach them
Hmm.
a deeper path and to help men have a safe place to to grieve and to cry and
Hmm.
be protected, in their spiritual journey because they often don't feel like they can alongside their wives or girlfriends. So Trey has a
Right.
really interesting path, and he's doing amazing good work in the world. I also have somebody really exciting coming up. Her name is Carrie Pittman. Carrie is a beautiful visual artist. Her paintings,
Hmm.
I think this month they're in Southern Living and Architectural Digest, and I can't remember all the ones.
Oh, wow.
But Carrie has this story. She's in her mid 40s, and she went through, gosh, I'm going to say a hard 10 years um, dealing with anorexia, just being at death's door over and over again, and really felt God calling her out of a family business where she was making lots of money. Her family was propping her up. She was going to be the CEO of this big insurance company. And she went and walked into her dad one day and said, "God's calling me to paint." And she had only just painted for fun. And her dad's a great man, and I love David too, but he basically like slammed the door on her and said, "I'm not giving you any money. This is ridiculous. You're amazing at this business," kind of thing. So she really followed her heart. And if you look at her on Instagram, you'll see she's made it, but she has this journey of constantly overcoming. And then most recently, she's been in a very difficult infertility journey. So as a
Oh,
woman, Carrie has so many great messages for us, how she handled
yeah.
her issues with food, anorexia, fear, growing up in a wealthy community, and all the expectations that were on her.
Right.
And that was a lot of why she, used her power with food to control. And then what she's been through in choosing a passion career over the expectation of family and money. And then here she is, dealing with something a lot of women deal with today, um, with infertility. So
Mm.
those three guests are coming up, and I'm excited about all of them.
I'm excited too. I can't wait to hear them.
Yeah, all
Um,
amazing humans in the world, doing
well, I can't imagine you wouldn't have anyone other than that on your show.
well.
So
Thank you.
I'm just so excited for you and all that you've already done. And you can tune into the Soul Talks podcast with Theresa Bruno every Wednesday on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And Theresa, thank you so much for coming on the Ageless podcast today. You are such a strong, kind, caring woman, and I have so enjoyed this conversation with you. You are a light. You're a survivor. Just keep shining that light. You're
And
just an
you are all
amazing
the
woman.
same. I push it right back at you. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so
Thank
honored
you.
to have had this time with you. Let's go have coffee.
I would love that. I would
Okay.
love that. Or even a virtual coffee
There you
at this
go.
point. Or come up and come skiing.
I like that best.
Yes, yes, yes. I have the chills right now. I really do. I have chills from head to toe.
Here,
I just feel such a beautiful connection with you. You're
well,
such a beautiful
hugs,
person.
hugs.
Hugs, hugs, hugs.
New Year's hugs and so many blessings, love, and so many
Yes.
blessings.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ageless. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Tune in next week for a new episode.